What's up, everyone? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Bucks. And Frank's back by popular demand. Everyone's happy about that. And we've spoken about different things about the draft, Frank. We haven't quite gone into individual names. So we're going to do that a little bit today as we continue our build up to the NBA draft.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday. Also find some other stuff over at ESPN and alongside me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, making a triumphant return, as I said, Frank Madden. Of course, we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of every day. And nothing gets people excited like the offseason, Frank, whether it's players that they want to see on the Bucks, whether it's draft picks, which we haven't had a lot of, we haven't had a lot of fun around draft time in recent years, but the Bucks do have pick 24, which is getting people curious. People have heard my thoughts about particular positions that the Bucks might like to draft. We're going to get into some names today, but just right off the top, if you're the Bucks, how are you approaching this? Because they're in a weird situation. We've gone through the salary cap stuff. They don't have a lot of money to spend. And ideally, in a very difficult position at pick 24, you'd like a player that could potentially play, which is a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think you, if you keep the pick, you are hoping that it might be somebody who can give you bench minutes this year, but more realistically, probably not, right? Probably a guy that I look at it as you're drafting a guy to hopefully become a rotation piece or like a real positive contributor maybe by year two, right? And so I think for better or worse, I mean, I'm generally fairly conservative as far as like the team building stuff, but I think when you win a championship, kind of validates that conservatism. So I'm certainly in the hashtag team run it back camp, and I think there are obviously questions that are going to have to be answered around Brook Lopez, certainly over the next year. We'll see kind of where he's at. I think, again, from what we saw towards the end of the season when he came back, I still feel like, your best chance is Brook Lopez being your starting center. I think there's a good chance that Brook Lopez plays, less of a role perhaps this year than maybe a couple of years ago, especially in the playoffs, right? Maybe you have to be better at playing smaller and finding different ways and different lineup combinations. But I think for the most part, you're saying Giannis plus Chris plus Drew plus supporting cast. And we've talked about, obviously, my hope of bringing back both Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis, because, what else what else are you going to do? So I think for the most part, kind of roughly what you have if you can bring back that core group. Again, are they going to use the taxpayer mid-level? I would probably only see that being used in like one slug if one of Bobby or Pat left. I think there's a good chance just because of the financial ramifications, and we've talked about it. You talked about it with Justin again and Camille last night. I imagine they may go a little short. Just say, we're going to keep some flexibility, not use our full taxpayer mid-level, given again the multiplier is basically like 5x in terms of total cost impact. Per dollar spent, given where they are in the luxury tax at that point. So, but yeah, I mean, I think I view the pick this year. A few years back, it was, well, we got bad contracts, right? The Tony Snell, you trade Tony Snell's bad contract because you need to clear room so you can sign Brook Lopez and, kind of bring back the core of the team after the first year of the Bud era. They're really not in that spot. I mean, they really don't have like bad contracts that you have to salary dump to try to create cap room. Certainly not in cap room, but really even to shed like luxury tax room. Are you thrilled paying Grayson Allen $9 million a year? Maybe not thrilled, right? I don't think he's overpaid in the grand scheme of like the NBA, but for a team that, puts a premium on guys that can play two ways and hit shots when it matters, obviously it was not a great look for Grayson in the second round of the playoffs. By the way, he still shot like 39% from three in the playoffs because he was so damn good.
Poor old Chicago.
Yeah, and he had, a couple totally adequate games against the Celtics as well, although the last couple were really bad. So I think, again, my sort of decision tree on that pick goes, I'd lean towards keeping it at this point, just again, because at some point you're going to have to try to reload. And none of us want to think about, Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday tailing off and sort of declining. But I mean, it's going to happen, right? At some point. I mean, I think, really relative to the previous season, I mean, neither of those guys really had like a big drop off. Chris, relative to 2 years ago, certainly wasn't as efficient this year, but for the most part, I mean, most of the other metrics are pretty much where, the last 2 years have been pretty damn close. So, and Drew, a great regular season again this year, playoffs, maybe some question marks. So, so I think the big question is, is there some trade, Grayson plus George plus 24 that gets you some type of moval neater, Kane.
I like
Needle mover. It's like the whole paints in the point thing we used to talk about. I'm not sold at this point. I think you've seen some of my list of like potential like targets, right? I mean, just some names, right, that you might consider trading for, which again, some of these guys you may not need a first round pick for, some of them you might, but like, Royce O'Neal, Josh Hart, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Kelly Oubre, Justin Holiday, Kenrich Williams, Kyle Kuzma, Harrison Barnes, Jay Crowder, Larry Nance, Cam Reddish. I say that through gritted teeth. Definitely wouldn't give up a first round pick for Cam Reddish. PJ Washington. Again, are any of those guys, I would guess most of those guys would probably help you next year more than a first round pick. But if you have to give up Grayson Allen and a first round pick, is that a clear upgrade in the grand scheme of not just next year, but looking ahead to the next few years? Pretty debatable. All those guys have some warts. Some of those guys are cheaper, like Kenrich Williams. Maybe it's George Hill plus a first round pick gets you Kenrich Williams as kind of like a combo forward defensive guy. So there's some options the Bucks have. I think there's some stuff there's some trade potential there. I don't know that there are any that like just get me super excited, but I mean, I think that's really what the Bucks are going to be weighing between now and the draft is there some trade move that could really help? I also don't think the Bucks are, burying Grayson Allen as much as probably the average fan.
Yeah.
On Bucks Twitter member has. And again, I think with Grayson, it's a matter of, I don't think you can go into a season thinking that he's your starting shooting guard in May and June. And if for no other reason than Bud didn't even think that before the playoffs, right? And his entire playoffs was as basically, came as a bench guy until obviously, eventually with the Middleton injury, eventually he finds his way back in the starting five, and obviously didn't work out very well. So, so I think in all likelihood, probably they don't make a move like that. I'm sure they will explore options and, again, see what they can do. And they don't have obviously a lot of draft capital other than this year's first round pick, which again, the trade can't officially go through until after the draft, till July 1st. Or actually, no, it could go back. It depends on kind of the salaries involved. But with Grayson Allen, probably not until July 1st, just because his contract extension doesn't kick in until then. But otherwise, the trade of the pick itself on its own could be done on draft night. But either way, it's been so long since I got excited about the draft, Kane. And so, part of this is also just me looking at, again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this is like, oh, it's a great draft to be at 24 or something like that. Who knows, right? People try to prognosticate about the depth of the draft and those things. And then who knows, right? Kind of shit happens and stuff never sort of works out exactly how you want. So that said, I'd much rather think about college prospects and potential draft picks than watch the NBA Finals these days. So I've been kind of doing, some research. I am now a draft expert. I am always skeptical of people who claim experts. I think it's human nature. Every year we kind of become goldfish and forget all the players we liked who ended up sucking, and only remember the guys that we liked who ended up becoming good. I think that's typically how us kind of, draft fans, and I'm going to put lump myself in there as far as like, we are fans of the draft. We are not draft experts. But I've kind of gone through it, and you offered your thoughts a little bit last night on the episode. You made a comment about not wanting to draft the center. I actually agree with that. And part of that's because of Brook Lopez. I still think he's clearly going to be better than anybody you draft or add in free agency. But also, I just don't look at centers. I mean, unless you're getting like some really like dynamic center, I just don't really look at center as a spot that I'm like prioritizing in the draft. And again, maybe we're spoiled because the Bucks got Brook Lopez for, less than the full biannual exception or whatever what they got him for. But I just don't put a premium on using kind of sparse draft capital or even sparse taxpayer mid-level money on a backup center at this point. And again, not to say that the Brook sort of position in question won't have to be addressed at some point, but that's not really kind of where I'd focus. My preference, and I'll throw this to you after I give you my kind of quick thoughts, but my kind of preference in terms of like the profile of type of player I like or I'm interested in, I don't want big centers. I don't want really small guards because again, I'm just thinking about the playoffs and, again, we don't want to over-index on any one series or any kind of one thing, but, we've seen the Bucks go deep in the playoffs repeatedly over the last 4 years, the Bucks of the Bud era. And, what kind of players tend to be very playable and very valuable? It's, guards and wings and sort of what I'd call combo forwards, guys who can play up, maybe can play next to Giannis as a four-man type guy in a small ball lineup, hit threes, defend. Those are the types of kind of player profiles that I find most interesting. So throw out the really tall guys, throw out the really short guys, and just find me kind of like tough, ideally athletic guys that have some modicum of skill, basketball IQ. And, I think all of us would say we want guys that can shoot because of kind of the spacing question. I think we also have to be realistic. Like there's got to be some trade-offs when you're at number 24 and you're trying to find those other traits I just mentioned. So I think if history we look at like what projects well and what's sort of clearer to translate versus what is maybe a little hazier. Shooting is one of those things that just often comes later with players, especially for, especially for guys who are kind of more on the athletic range and maybe didn't have to be kind of top tier shooters coming up or they had growth spurts, things like that. So I kind of look for guys who maybe have some kind of projectable shooting, meaning maybe they're good free throw shooters, but haven't shown that they can consistently hit threes at the college level, or some of these guys, playing in the G League last year or in Europe, or Australia, I should also say. Jane.
Thank you.
So I don't get totally spooked by guys who aren't necessarily like, 40% 3-point shooters and shooting off the dribble and high volume 3-point shooting types like that. I'm actually, even though I really want guys who can shoot, I kind of look at that as a kind of thing that maybe you can kind of gamble on a little bit to be something that develops. And again, not everybody's going to be, Kawhi Leonard or whatever, but I look more for kind of like the physical toolkit and some of the, again, you hear about intangibles, things like that, but I look more for kind of the physical tools and the raw materials. And again, that might mean you have to wait 3 years rather than a year and a half or 1 year for the guy to be an impact player. But again, I think when you have a guy like Giannis at 27, I think, you also you can't just be thinking short term. Again, that's the most valuable thing is the window now in the next couple of years with the talent you have. But I think with the draft, obviously you can't be thinking too short-sighted. And so often if you try to just sort of think narrowly about that, you don't pick the best player. So let me put it back to you. I mean, other than hating big guys, are there other kind of like traits, characteristics, kind of profile type things that you find interesting in prospects?
Yeah, that's just me being a very average sized human. I've got it. I hold a grudge against the big guys. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, I think to your broader point, I think it's a good point. Maybe, and we've seen the Bucks do it in the second round a little bit over recent years, where they've taken guys that have been 4 years in college, whatever it may be. Jordan Wara was a little bit older. Our old friend Sam Merrill was a little bit older. And obviously Malcolm Brogdon was as well. So they've done it a few times. So yeah, perhaps in the second round, there's more value of doing that. Pick 24 historically, there's actually been some decent pick 24s in the past, but it is more of a crapshoot at that point. And I want to get to your point, but our friends at Rock Auto are tapping me on the shoulder and they're saying, you got to get this ad read in before you throw back to Frank or we'll never get to do it. So this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning while the person behind the counter waits, looks at their computer? They've only got one brand. It's honestly quite useless when you can just go to Rock Auto, jump on the online catalog. You can spend hours there. Once you're done with Locked On Bucks, just fill in your night on the rockauto.com catalog and you have a great time. There's no doubt about it. You also save a lot of money, 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership. Go explore the easy-to-use website today to find out the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com. See all those parts you can get, right? Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. And then, Frank, you haven't heard this for a while, so you wouldn't have heard about the Built Bar caramel brownie, but I got to tell you, if you were feeling a little unwell, which I understand you were for the last week, then a caramel brownie from Built Bar would have had you fixed immediately. Because if don't you just love a chewy chocolate brownie? What about a caramel brownie with a caramel swirled on top? So good. What if I told you that you can have all that chewy, chocolatey deliciousness plus 17 grams of protein? You wouldn't believe me, but you are in luck today because caramel brownie bars are available at built.com right now. And you better hurry up because they are a fan favorite and they're not going to last long at all. Forget about dessert. Just go for the Built Bar instead. That's my motto in life anyway. And all Built Bars are made with collagen protein, which the body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. There are a million reasons why you should try Built Bars, but for now, let's just say the caramel brownies will rock your world. So hey, go to built.com, use the promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, let's get back into the draft talk. And I mentioned this a couple of days ago on the pod, but the Ultimate NBA mock draft starts on June 16th. And I can give you some insider info. Frank was asked about this, and he threw it directly on me. So I will say, whoever I picked in this draft, all complaints are directed my way. But with over 50 insiders, nothing equals the Ultimate NBA mock draft. The Locked On NBA Big Board draft experts, plus the Odyssey insiders. First pick is June 16th. Search Ultimate NBA mock draft and follow now so you don't miss a pick. By the way, just one other tidbit, Frank, as we get going. There's nothing I like more. I love basketball Twitter. I also like real estate Twitter. And when basketball and real estate Twitter come together, it's beautiful stuff. And I saw a tweet today that said that Bobby Portis is looking for a house in Milwaukee. So it's great news. Great news. Bobby Porter house. Anyway, it looks like he was looking for a house. So shout out to the mayor of Milwaukee. Hopefully he is sticking around. So what I did, and I know you've got some names specifically that you want to get into, and I don't know whether these guys fit your list, Frank, but basically what I did is I went to my guy, Jonathan Gavoni. I went to his mock draft, and I went to Sam Vecini's mock draft, and then I just had one other wild card that I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. But Gavoni, this came out literally 24 hours ago, and a lot of these guys I'm finding when I'm reading these draft experts, in some draft they'll be like pick 16. And then you'll look at someone else's mock and they'll be pick 26. So it does seem like there's a lot of variation in terms of where these guys could go, which is why if you at least give yourself a list of 6 names, you get a chance of being happy on draft night. But Gavoni had Nikola Jovic, which, as I've said, I would be happy to do it and just pretend that he's going to be the next Jokic. He's 6'11". He can pass the ball a little bit. He can shoot the ball a little bit. Interesting that Gavoni had the comparisons in terms of style of play. He had Danilo Gallinari and Nemanja Bjelica as well, who we've just seen play in the NBA Finals. Did you have a look at this man at all, Frank?
No, I heard he's not a good defender, so I pass, hard pass. Maybe not a hard pass. But yes, by the way, the irony is not only is his name only one consonant away from Nikola Jokic, he also played for Jokic's old team in Serbia, Mega Basket. I think it was Mega Lex when he was there. The changes depending on the sponsor, but yeah, no pressure. And by the way, the thing I'm using, if you search Hoops Hype consensus mock draft or aggregate mock draft, they
Nice.
have kind of they show the average ranking, and then they show the range of the players. So like Jovic, by example, he's currently, his average ranking would put him at number 21 to the Denver Nuggets, of course. And his range is 17 to 33. So, gives you an idea
That's
of
right. Yeah.
kind of where those goalposts are. Yeah, and so I mean, obviously, I haven't been looking at really like kind of the top end of the draft that much. If I'm using the consensus mock draft, really my research started at number 16 with Tari Eason, who's kind of for me, he's a four-man from LSU. He's ranked, he's kind of in the 12 to 18 range, so probably not going to be a guy that that the Bucks would have a chance to draft. But I think if I'm looking at sort of like the range from like, let's say 16 to 35 in terms of guys that are in that range on this sort of consensus mock draft, guys that I find interesting in a good way. Okay, so guys that I have at least some positive vibes toward. I think Eason is a guy, really interesting, versatile kind of defensive profile, huge hands, athletic, great kind of grab it and go type guy in transition. And it's kind of weird, like the IQ, his assist numbers suck, so you worry about his kind of basketball IQ, kind of the half court stuff. But again, the productivity was like through the roof last year. Like he averaged like 16 and 7, but in 24 minutes a game, he didn't even start for LSU, but he put up just like these monster per minute numbers. And he's super athletic. And the weirdest thing is like it's like he's a guy that you have questions about his shooting, but he shot 36% from three and 80% from the foul line. So it's like, huh. Those guys who like you feel like, oh, they shouldn't be good shooters, and they're like, well, the ball goes in at a pretty good rate. That type of player intrigues me. And again, not a perfect player, but a guy that, like, again, is there an OG Anunoby side to his game? Maybe, right? I think that's sort of the intrigue with him. If I kind of keep going down the list, the next guy on the consensus is Ousmane Dieng, who I think would know way better than me, given that he played in the NBL, albeit for New Zealand. So I don't know how you feel about guys playing in the NBL but playing with the New Zealand Breakers, I guess. He's 12 to 24. If I recall correctly, he was terrible statistically in the NPL. So I don't really know what to make of that. I think he's again sort of like a toolsy guy. Intriguing in theory. I don't know. This is one of these guys where I would actually defer to you. Like, what is the Ousmane Dieng intel at this point?
Yeah, so I was fortunate because the funny thing about New Zealand is this New Zealand team hasn't been to New Zealand for 2 years because of travel restrictions. So they were based in Melbourne. So I saw these guys all the time, Ousmane Dieng and also Hugo Besson. And Ousmane Dieng it's crazy. If you even look at some of his draft reports from a couple years ago, he's listed at 6'6", but this guy is like genuinely 6'10", 6'11", and was playing like the 3 spot for New Zealand Breakers. And he started off horrifically. But this was a New Zealand team that was a rabble for most of the season. They had so many injuries. Every veteran on the team was hurt, basically. But by the end of the season, he was really good. He had some really, really good games. He's super smooth. I wouldn't say he's like a crazy athlete, but his shot looks pretty good. And he's got a nice floater. He can sort of, I don't know whether he'd be able to put the ball on the floor as a 6'11" guy in the NBA, but he was certainly doing it in the NBL. And then defensively, the team was a mess. But by the end of the season, you could see that, okay, well, this guy can move. He is legitimately 6'10", 6'11", so he can defend multiple positions. So just purely from a size point of view, he looks like a guy that is what NBA teams would want. But there's definitely an aspect to him where I'm like, I could see that he's out of the league in 2 years. It could go one of either way. The guy that every time I spoke to him, I was like, talk to him about the NBA, and it's not surprising he's French, but he always pointed to Nick Batum. And Nick Batum is obviously a bit shorter. But he said he was the guy. I mean, he also said Kevin Durant, but Nick Batum was the guy that he said that I've watched him my whole life and said that's the type of position I could play. That's the type of role I could have. Because of the upside, it seems like he's starting to really move up the boards. And I didn't really consider him just because I don't think that he's going to last to 24 because of that, but it'll be interesting.
Yeah, 12 to 24 is the range in the consensus mock. He's number 17. Kind of one of those guys where it's like it's like you almost like hope somebody else picks him just so you don't have to make that call because it's just like, you draft a guy like that and it's like if he sucks, you're like, oh yeah, but we probably could have seen that. We could have seen that coming, but then maybe he doesn't. Maybe he totally hits and he's this super dynamic two-way player. Again, we'll see. Kind of just going down the list, Ty Washington, guard from Kentucky. I have no opinion of Ty Washington. You stop me if you have an opinion on any of these guys. Marjon Beauchamp, G League Ignite. I find the G League Ignite guys very interesting because, they're all like high profile, generally like, prep type players who go to the G League. They play in this kind of unique environment. I think it's going to be interesting to see now, like now that this is kind of like we're going to start getting like year over year, we're going to see kind of like how some of these guys, and I mean, Jalen Green, obviously kind of the highest profile guy that came through the Ignite system a year ago. But it's going to be really interesting to see kind of how these guys develop. Like, do they develop faster? Are they more ready for the NBA, having played in the G League versus college, getting kind of more of that professional type of experience? Dyson Daniels is the highest rated guy from this year's class, and I'm sure you have spent a lot of time. I don't know. Have you talked to Dyson Daniels? That he's projected number in the 10 spot right now. Have you talked to Dyson Daniels at this point yet? I know you're kind of covering him.
Yeah, we had him he was back in Australia for a couple of months, and we had him in the studio at ESPN. And again, he's another guy that's just like shot up in the last like year or so, and again is projected. I think it's a shame. It's a shame he played so well because early in the season I was like, oh, we could get an Aussie on the Bucks, but I don't think so.
Yeah. Daniels is really interesting, right? I mean, he's this like big like playmaking guy. Like, you don't exactly know what to do with them. I think all of the G League Ignite guys, so basically Daniels, Beauchamp, and Jaden Hardy, kind of like, how shooting questions, definitely not guys that were flawless. But again, it's like they're playing against real men. It's kind of, G League is just sort of a different environment. I don't, again, like compare that to a guy playing like mid-major college basketball, who's like an older player. And we'll get to Jalen Williams, who's a guy I like a lot. Like, it's kind of hard to compare, right? Like Jalen Williams playing at Santa Clara as like a third-year college player versus a guy going from basically high school to the G League and playing in this kind of weird thing against men. That's where the challenge of scouting these guys really comes in. But I think Beauchamp is interesting. I think he's like about 6'6", 7-foot wingspan, very much like, okay, best case scenario, he's this sort of prototypical defensive wing type player. He's athletic, makes explosive plays around the rim, has some semblance of a jump shot, but again, like it's not like doesn't go in that much now. Like, again, is he going to be 25 to 30% shooter like his entire career? Possibly, right? But again, maybe he's one of these guys that kind of figures it out, right? I mean, I mentioned OG Anunoby, kind of a great example. I mean, I think Anunoby was like a 50-some% free throw shooter in college and like low 30s from 3-point range over his 2 years at Indiana, and then goes to Toronto and immediately is like a pretty good shooter right out of the box. So it's just so hard to project kind of how some of these guys are going to develop, and some guys it just happens very quickly, and some guys it just never does. But Beauchamp to me is interesting because, again, I think he kind of ticks the boxes of sort of athletic, toolsy, two-way kind of potential. And again, if you want to gamble on some scoring upside, on potential shooting upside, kind of maybe figuring out, like he's an interesting guy. He's projected 19 to 29. And interestingly, 19 is his average ranking. So again, when they average it, some kind of wonky stuff happens. But kind of going down the list some more, EJ Liddell.